There is a generation that has been extremely influential to the world that we live in today. Their actions not only carved their future, but their future turned out to be our present. We're talking about the baby boomers. And on this episode, we're going to compare American boomers to Polish boomers and how the same generation turned out to live in opposite worlds. Boom! Boom! Cześć ludzie! What's up, people? Hola, JT here. Welcome to another episode. Imagine this scenario. Two people, both born in the same year, let's say 1950. But one of them grows up in a beautiful, calm and quiet American suburb. A house with a beautiful green yard and a car in the driveway. A TV in the living room that is broadcasting amazing news. Economy is booming, jobs are plentiful. The future looks bright. As a matter of fact, the future looks so good that it's almost impossible to believe that the next generation won't have it better than the previous generation. The other one grows up in Poland, in a dark, communistic era blocky. His parents work hard, but what they earn doesn't really determine what they get to buy. Instead of supermarkets being full, all you have is long queues just to buy basic groceries. Of course, ration cards and a sense of limited resources in the foreseeable future. But despite sharing the same birth year and the same generational bracket, they have experienced completely different cultural and economic systems. And those systems shaped how they think about money, success, mental health, work, and security. The term baby boomer refers to that generation born after the Second World War, specifically between the years 1946 and 1964. After the devastation of the war, many countries experienced an extreme rise in birth rates. Families were optimistic about the future, economies were rebuilding, and population grew rapidly. However, the political world was split onto two major systems after the Second World War. You had the Western system, led by the United States, that was developed under the capitalistic democracy. And then the Eastern countries, under the Soviet Union's boot, were, of course, under communism. And because of this division, each generation grew up in a totally different reality from each other. American boomers were raised in a society that prioritized individual opportunity and private ownership and consumer growth. The Polish boomers, on the other hand, grew up in a system where the state controlled much of the economy, where shortages were common, and where daily life required patience, improvisation, and resilience. This contrast would deeply influence how each generation would approach financial decisions, emotional life, and even their expectations for the future. To really understand the mindset of American boomers, we first have to understand how good the American economy was during their childhood. The decades after World War II were one of the most prosperous periods for the US history. Manufacturing expanded rapidly, wages grew steadily, and the middle class expanded dramatically. For many families, it was actually possible to support the whole household with just one income. Homes in newly built suburbs were continuously being built. Of course, college tuition was totally manageable, and stable careers were widely available. American children growing up in this era absorbed a very important message, which was that if you work hard, you will succeed. It's almost a guarantee that you will succeed. And this belief became really deeply embedded in the minds of American boomers. In other words, economic growth seemed like something that was guaranteed. Now, Poland's economy reality was very different. After the war, Poland became part of the Eastern Communistic Bloc. The economy was organized through central planning, meaning that the government determined production, prices, and employment. While this system guaranteed basic housing and work opportunities, the problem was that there were not enough consumer goods. Shops had limited supplies, people sometimes waited hours in line to buy meat or sugar or any household item. Even when someone had money in their hands to acquire what they needed, still did not guarantee that we'll be able to have access to those products. Where American households were surrounded by expanding consumer economy, Polish households were learning basically to navigate through scarcity. Now let's talk about something that, in my opinion, creates one of the biggest divisions when it comes to those two groups: the personal finance mindset. These two economic systems created two total opposite approaches when it comes to personal finances. American boomers came of age during the rise of modern consumer culture, what today we call consumerism. Credit cards became more common, mortgages basically expanded home ownership, and financial markets gave way to new investment opportunities. For Americans, borrowing money was not seen as something dangerous or careless. If anything, it was seen as a tool to achieve a better lifestyle. And the beginning of modern day reality in America started, which is that owning a credit card, buying things on credit, having a mortgage, leasing a vehicle, or just paying it off slowly became the new norm for the middle class families. In Poland, however, borrowing money carried a different emotional significance. People did not trust financial institutions, so it was very common to have people put their money away in their houses, famously under the mattress or hidden somewhere in a box of old cookies. Not to forget that, to begin with, accumulating enough wealth to save or put away was not a normal thing. And as a result, many Poles developed extremely cautious financial habits. And those habits didn't entirely disappear. Even today, we see that Polish people are a lot more cautious when it comes to their finances and investments and where they put the money and how they manage their personal finances compared to the Americans, who still to this day still own mortgages, still have credit cards, still buy something on a loan. For the most part, Americans are still under this illusion, even if it's an outdated one, that the market has their back. It's a solid economy, and sooner or later, their salaries and wages will allow them to pay off the debt. In Poland, on the other hand, even though people earn a lot less than in America, the personal debt per capita is a lot less than that of Americans. Another major difference lies in the attitude towards mental health and emotional expression. In the US, the boomers lived through major cultural revolutions: the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and the rise of modern psychology. They all played a big role in American society. Over time, conversations about personal growth, mental health, therapy, they all became a lot more normalized. By the late 20th century, the self-help industry, psychotherapy, and personal growth have become a wildly accepted part of American life. In communist Poland, on the other hand, open discussions about mental health, that was not as common at all. Even to this day, it's still not that common. On the other hand, the culture emphasized durability, practicality, focusing on work, on getting a task done. Don't worry about what is it that you're feeling. If you work hard, if you focus on the goal, you're not gonna have time to be thinking on whether you are mentally affected by your feelings that are unresolved. No, that did not exist in Poland back then. It was all about overcoming difficulties instead of just focusing on their personal, emotional struggles. Many individuals just simply develop this idea that you suffer quietly. Let's talk now about work and career identity. In the United States, boomer developed a very strong career identity. It was totally common for individuals to work for the same company for years and years, sometimes decades. Who they were and their identity was associated to the things that they did at their company. They were a lawyer, so all of a sudden that's who you are. You are Dr. such and such. It was all about building a reputation and advancing within that organization. That career identity almost had a direct connection to social status. What you did, where you worked, determined your place in the ladder of social elites. In Poland, the communistic labor system worked completely different. It was all state-centric. Political connections would heavily determine sometimes whether you would advance or not. Jobs were often assigned to you by the head organization. While employment was generally stable, just entrepreneurship, individual career mobility was a lot more limited. And after the fall of communism, you had a very interesting phenomenon happen here in Poland, where a lot of Poles had to learn a new system. They had to develop new ways of basically conducting themselves. They were relatively foreign. Now, don't get me wrong, obviously, even during communistic times, during PRL times, still there were things happening, underground. People were setting up basically what became the foundations of this new capitalistic Poland. But it's still fair to say, outside of that communistic reality, this new transition required an enormous amount of flexibility, enormous amount of adaptation. And as a matter of fact, a lot of Polish people became wealthy very quickly because they were able to adapt. They saw the opportunities. And I think that for the most part, Poland has been extremely successful at adapting, because Poland now is a capitalistic society, but at the same time, there's still cautiousness. People are still careful. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. It's very difficult to catch a Pole with their pants down. No, they still carry that DNA of observing, listening, thinking, and quietly deciding whether something is worth their time or if it's simply just too good to be true. When we talk about generations, especially between people born around the same years, it's very easy to jump to the conclusions that they share very similar realities and similar experiences, but that could not be further from the truth. This comparison shows us how powerful economical and historical environments can be. And even today, many of the financial habits, emotional attitudes, and social expectations still reflect the worlds that these baby boomers grew up in. Boom! That's all, guys. That's the end of this episode. I hope you liked it. Share with us in the comment section if you liked this discussion that I think plays an incredible part in understanding the world that we live in today, especially today, with the wars and the conflict, and looking at the men that are leading our societies today. Many of them are boomers. And depending where they're from, you can see the attitude that they have towards things like war, conflict, security. So I'll leave you guys with that and see you on another episode. Bye-bye.